Tracy and I have decided that our early retirement plans look better when we include double downsizing. Now, our pension finances are not completely reliant on this, but as I'll go into, it does make complete sense for us. So to start with, what is double downsizing and why do people use it as part of their retirement strategy? Most people, when they plan to retire early, put together a financial forecast of how much they expect to spend each year in retirement and then match this against their savings and their retirement income. And this is to make sure that they aren't going to run out of money. Now, downsizing the family home will, for many, form part of this. I mean, double downsizing is just that, planning to move to a smaller property twice during retirement to better manage cash flows and investments. Downsizing twice rather than once actually makes a surprising difference to your cash flow forecast, and I'll run through an example calculation a little bit later to demonstrate this. But first, I want to talk about the practical reasons that Tracy and I have chosen this strategy. Now, Tracy and I are fortunate to have our largest home. It's a family home which we bought, for the family. Now that our children have grown up and are getting ready to start moving to their own homes, then living in this quite large house with just the two of us is no longer really what we want. I mean, we're both currently 55 and expect that when we reach our 80s, we'll want to be in a small, easy to manage property with perhaps one bedroom, a very small garden, no stairs to contend with. But we're not in our 80s, and we won't be for another 25 years. In a few years' time, when our kids are all settled, we'd like to be in a house that has a bedroom for us, one for visiting grandchildren, fingers crossed, and maybe a spare room for hobbies. We'll also want a reasonable sized garden, as gardening is part of our plans for keeping active in retirement. So we've got three options really. Option one is to stay in our large family home until we're 80, paying a large council tax and high energy bills to heat a house with rooms we'll barely ever use. And option two, do we move to our final destination now and have a single bedroom and a very little garden? And that would give up our ambitions really to have the grandkids over or to actually keep fit by looking after a garden. Or option three, do we downsize soonish to a house with a couple of spare rooms with one for hobbies and one for visiting grandkids, fingers crossed, then downsize again 20 years later when the grandkids are probably going to be too old to want to stay with us anyway, and the garden's probably becoming too hard to manage. Now, I know that we are in a very, very fortunate position of being able to consider this, but we do know from comments from previous videos that some of the people who watch this channel are also looking to retire in their 50s when their kids are moving on. So this may be of interest to some people watching. Now, as I've said, this makes a huge difference to pension planning forecasts. Sometimes people will exclude the money they'll receive when they downsize their home because they think that there are too many unknowns. This is a common mistake in financial planning. Just because there's uncertainty doesn't mean that you should not create a plan. In fact, in my experience, it's actually more important to make a plan when you have some uncertainty. Now, Tracy and I don't have an exact date when we'll be making our first or even our second downsizing decisions, but we've made a financial plan anyway, and we've made some assumptions. So our first assumption is that we will sell our current home in 5 years' time when we hit 60, and we'll downsize again 20 years later when we hit 80. Now, we feel this gives us enough time to be confident that our adult children will be settled, and this is an absolute must, obviously, before we make this kind of major change. I've had almost 100 people email me for a copy of our retirement calculator spreadsheet now, and I've made version 2 of this to include this option for double downsizing. Now, if you haven't seen the video on calculating your retirement budget, what I'll do is I'll tag it on the end of this video for you. It also includes some options of doing this calculation on paper for anyone who's potentially less confident with using computers. So to demonstrate how double downsizing affects a pension budget, I will use an imaginary case of Carla, who is retiring at 55. So as I'll explain in a bit more detail towards the end of this video, all these numbers are in net present value, which means effectively we don't need to worry about inflation because that's built in to the way the spreadsheet works. So we're always looking at numbers as they would look at today rather than at some kind of future value. So if you follow around where my mouse is, this is Carly and her age is 55. She has £250,000 saved in a pension pot. She's got some other pensions, which are a defined benefit pension of £10,000, and she gets that every year. And she's hoping to spend £34,000 a year in her retirement. So the growth number that we put into the spreadsheet is the growth we expect after inflation. So if we thought inflation was going to be 3%, for example, and we thought where we had our savings, we could get 5.5%, then the difference would be 2.5%, which is what we've got here. Now, we know from this that at age 90, she will actually have a deficit of £353,000. And this is assuming that she's got a state retirement age coming in at 67. So somehow she's got to bridge a gap of over £350,000. Now she knows the value of her house is £400,000, but she wants to end up in a very small house worth £200,000. So the big question is, can she fill that void of £350,000 with just a downsizing amount of £200,000? Well, with double downsizing, she may do. So let's assume that her first downsize, she's going to take about £100,000 of value out of their pension for that downsize. And she's going to do that when she is age 60. So at age 60, she takes £100,000 out of the value of the property when she downsizes. Okay, and now she's left with just short of £150,000, which she's got to make up, but she's only got another £100,000 worth of value to take out of her property before she finally ends up in her £200,000 property. So is that going to be possible? Well, she's thinking of making her final move when she's 70. So let's move down to the cell where she's 70 and add £100,000 in, see where we end up. And there we go, £11,000 positive. So at 90, she's made it. She's still got £11,544 in the bank when she reaches 90. Okay, so we can see there that she's bridged a gap of £350,000 with taking £100,000 out twice, so double downsizing. And that works because she'll be investing the amount, and then that amount, that £100,000, before she spends it, of course, will be growing at 2.5% per year. That's why she's able to save that amount. So for those watching who haven't seen the original video where I show this spreadsheet and how it works and how to do the same thing on paper, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go back and play a recent version of that video just for anyone who hasn't got it. And don't forget to email me and ask for a copy of the spreadsheet as well. This video shows you how to calculate if you're likely to run out of money when you retire. Now, in the first half, I'll do this with a pen and paper, and in the second half, I'll use a spreadsheet, and both work fine, to be honest. But at one point I do want to clarify up front is that this provides some useful information for you today, but it won't be something that you kind of pull out of a drawer and look at in the future. It's really a snapshot. So the numbers are based on the value of money today. So how much a pound is worth in 20 years' time won't be important. you'll see what I mean once I get into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up a video that I made last year, but I'm going to interrupt and stop it at various points and clarify some points that I didn't explain very well first time round.
Hi everyone, so today I'm going to have a go at working out how much you can spend in your retirement with the pension pot that you have. And I'm going to use pen and a piece of paper out and a calculator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through on paper how you can do this fairly easily. Now, it's always best to go and see a financial advisor and have it done properly. But if you want, for your own comfort, just to work out in your own head with your own numbers where you are, good method to do it, not too difficult. If you are the kind of person who prefers to use a spreadsheet and a computer, then I will show some of that a bit later on in the video. But the main objective today is how we can do this with a pen and paper. So let's get into it.
So the first thing I'm going to do is just draw some lines on this paper just to keep my columns in order. And this technique of using a piece of paper for creating a simple pension plan, I think is worth anyone considering, really. I mean, obviously the proper advice is to go and see a pension advisor, and you can actually ask your current pension provider to give you an extension early access to up to £5,000 worth of your investments to be able to go and see a financial advisor. But if you just want to do some ideas in your head on what to do, then this is a good way. So first column, I'm going to write age. Second column, savings. Then this third column, I'm going to identify what I spend. Fourth column, I am going to list any other pensions I've got, i.e. state pension. And then I'm going to have a column for growth, because the money is invested, it's going to grow. So a bit of detail on what goes in the spend column here. So one of the questions I got a lot last time was, what do we do about tax? Well, if you think about it, tax is an expenditure. So because we're dealing with yearly numbers here, you'll know from this sheet how much your income will be, how much money you'll have that year. So you'll be able to do a fairly rough estimation of what your tax will be. So the tax needs to go into your spend column. Now, the second one I wanted to mention, it was the growth column. Now, this is important. When I mentioned the fact that we're looking at today's numbers and this is a snapshot, you can look at growth of your savings in two ways. You can look at the nominal amount, which is, if you invest it in a bank and they say we're going to give you 5%, that's a nominal amount. Or you can look at the real amount. So you might invest it in a bank at 5%, and the interest rate, or you guess the interest rate over the period you're looking at is going to be around 3%. So therefore your real rate will be about 2%. So it's important that whatever number you choose to put in that column, that it's the growth taking away inflation. And that's really important. It's something that I didn't mention very clearly in the first one. The other thing I didn't mention very well here was this money, where's it coming from? So I might be talking about, having a pot of £200,000. That doesn't mean you've got £200,000 sitting in a bank account. What it means is your pension pot. So many people get to retirement age and they have a private pension or a work pension, and they just invest that in an annuity. But this is based on the fact that you won't do that. You will take the whole pot of money and then you'll draw it down over the period that I'm going to show you. So don't imagine in this I'm just asking you to have magically £300,000 saved, for example. That would be the amount that you've saved over your whole lifetime in your work pension, for example. Because the money is invested, it's going to grow a bit. And then I'm going to say what I've got left at the end of the year. So we'll start off with a guy who's 63, so 63, 64, 65. I'll just go up to 69 for now. Okay, so now we need to work out how much this person has got in pensions? Well, he doesn't have anything other than his state pension. So his state pension is going to start at 66. So I'll write a few of these in. So from 66 onwards, he's going to have a state pension of 11,500. Okay. Now the next thing we need to decide is how much growth we think our investments will get. So this is growth over and above inflation. So remember, we're working on today's numbers. We're not going to increase the amount of our pensions as we go along. We're working on today's numbers. And I'm going to say for this example that this person, Harry, has got £300,000 in savings to start off with, and he wants to spend £20,000 per year. Now, what this will allow us to do is to calculate if the amount that he has will be enough to sustain him paying £20,000 per year. So what we do is we start here with a calculator, and we're going to work out what growth Harry will get in his first year. So we said 2%. So we're going to work out 2% of £300,000. 2% equals £6,000. So we'll put that in the growth column. Now what we need to do next is just add along. So we've got £300,000 savings. We're going to take off the £20,000 that Harry will spend. And then we're going to add back in the £6,000 investment growth he's going to get off his savings. There we go. So at the end of year one, he'll have £286,000 left. So that's what we start is next year with. So we start with 286. 100,000. Okay, he's going to spend 20,000 again this year. Again, doesn't have any state pension yet. So let's work out what the growth is on 286,000. So 286,000 times 2% equals 5,720. Okay, so now we do the same thing again. Let's start off with his savings of 286,000 minus 20,000 plus the 5,720, and that gives us £271,720, which is what he'll start the year he's 65 with. 271,720. Okay, he's going to spend 20,000 again this year, because don't forget, we're using the figures at today's prices, so inflation's only built into the growth. So 21720 times 2% growth equals 534. We'll leave out the pence, just ignore the pence. 5,434. Let's see how much that leaves us at the end of this year to 271,720 minus 20,000 plus 5,434 equals 257,154. Okay, so in this next year, he will have some state retirement pension because he's 66. Okay, so let's start with the 257,154. Now, instead of having 20,000, he's got some pension here. So he's only going to need to take out 20,000 minus his pension of 11,500. Gives us 8,500. So this year he's only going to have to spend 8,500 out of his pension savings. Okay, so let's work out what the growth was on the 250,000, 257,154. Those 2% equals 5,143. Again, we'll leave the pence out. So at the end of this year, that will leave him with 25714 minus the 8,500. Plus the 5143 equals 253797. Okay, so let's start the next year with 253797. So again, because he's got a state retirement pension, we're only going to be spending 8,500 out of his savings this year. So let's see what 2% growth on his £250,797 is. 253797 times 2%. So let's see what you got the end of this year. So the 253797, take away the 8,500 he's spending, adding in the growth of 5075, 250,372. So where's the same bit of paper, but just typed out into a spreadsheet. So there you can see there. So after this row, where we ended to a spreadsheet version of this, just so it's easy to see where we end up with these calculations then. So as we can see then, the amount's reducing every year, but when we get to the age of 90 here, what's left is £155,000, which means actually this pension calculation has worked out. They haven't run out of money by the time they hit 90, which was the objective. So working through this calculation, it's possible to have a look, year on year, how the pension's being utilised and whether there's any chance that the retiree is going to run out of money. So we can use the same sheet with some different assumptions of a different person, and let's see how this one works out. So meet Sally. She's 58. She has £150,000 in savings in her DC pension, and she's also got a DB pension of £12,200. Now, Sally wants to spend £26,000 a year in her retirement, and she's assuming a moderate amount of growth in her investments of 2%. So let's have a look in some detail how that works out for her. So we've gone through exactly the same process as we did on the first sheet here. We've added in Sally's pension, pension of £12,200, which means if she wants to spend £26,000 before she gets a state retirement, she'll be spending £14,800 out of her savings, and after she'll only be spending £3,300 after she gets her state retirement pension. So let's see where she ends up at 90. So at 90 we can see Sally just about makes it. She ends up at 90 with £5,126 left. So if you want to run through these numbers a bit more slowly, feel free to press pause at any time, or even just save this video. And if you need to come back to it to work out, to remember how to do any of the calculations, come back to the video anytime and have another look through. If you're a subscriber to the channel, you can also email me at eric@timetoretire.co.uk, and I will send you across this spreadsheet with some instructions how you fill it in if you prefer to use a spreadsheet rather than using pen and paper. But as you've seen earlier, it's okay to use either. Let's have a look at another example. This is Margaret, and Margaret is 67. She has £150,000 in savings. She doesn't have any other pensions other than a state pension, and she'd like, if possible, to spend £20,000 but she's assuming growth of 3% above inflation. So just like any other spreadsheets here, we've laid it out in the same way. Starting at 67, Margaret will have a state pension available from 67. So we can see £150,000 savings there. And the growth of 3% means that her growth in the first year will be 4,500. She'll have her state pension of 11,500, which means she'll need to spend 8,500 from her pot. So let's see, once we run through the numbers until the age of 90, where she gets to. So we can see with this level of expenditure, Margaret will have £20,188 left at the point that she retires. So again, safe for Margaret under these assumptions. Let's have a look at a different pensioner. Meet Tim. He's 62, wants to retire at 62. He's got £500,000 in his pension pot. He's got no other private pensions though, other than his state pension. And he would like to spend £35,000 a year and expects to receive 3% growth in his investments above inflation. So let's see how that turns out for him. So we can see here that Tim retires at 62 but doesn't start drawing his state pension till 66. And what we can see, the £500,000 there has growth of £15,000 in the first year, which means he will have to spend the full 35,000, leaving 480,000 left in his pot at the end of the year. And that continues on until he gets to 66, at which point he'll only need to spend 23,500 a year because he's also getting his state pension of 11,500. Let's see where Tim gets to by his 90th birthday. So we can see out the £500,000 that Tim started with, he's actually left with just over £37,000 in his pension pot by the time he reaches his 90th birthday. And that's at a spend of £35,000 throughout his retirement. So let's jump across to a new pensioner. This is Amanda. She is 56 and she has savings of £255,000 plus a £25,800 a year private pension. She'd like to spend quite a lot. She'd like to spend £43,000 each year, but she's assuming quite good growth, 3% above inflation. So we can see here that she starts with a £255,000. At a growth of 3%, that means after the end of her first year, she will have had growth in their investments of £7,650. And of course, she also has the other pension of £25,800, which means she's going to need to spend £17,200 out of her investment pot for the first year here. That will leave her £245,450 at the end of the first year. Let's see where that leaves her at 90. So we can see even with this level of spend at £43,000 a year, she's still left with almost £100,000. Let's look at another example, and this example is John. So John is 55, wants to retire. He knows he has £150,000 in savings and £12,200 in a private pension. He wants to spend about £25,000 a year, and he's not so sure on growth, so he's going to go careful and say he's got 2% growth above inflation. So let's see how that turns out for John. So he starts at 55 with £150,000 in savings, quite a low growth of 2% above inflation, which will only give £3,000 in growth in investments during this year. So that means with the other pensions at 12,200, for John to top that up to 25,000, he's going to need to spend 12,800 out of his pension and savings each year. So we can see the reduction, how quickly that's going down for John. But let's see where he gets to by the time he's 90. So John's made it. At 90, he doesn't have much left. He only has £9,906 left, but that is assuming quite a careful growth level of only 2%. So let's move to our next pensioner. Let's now talk about Barbara. Now, Barbara is 65. She has savings of £255,000 in her pension pot. She's got another smallish pension, private pension of £5,000 a year, and she'd like to spend £28,000. She's been cautious in her investment predictions and only predicts that she will be receiving 2% above inflation. So let's see where this takes her to. Well, she has another pension of £5,000. So to get to 28,000, she only needs to actually spend 23,000 from her pension pot. And what we can see then is her pension kicks in, her state retirement pension kicks in at 66. So where will this get her to at 90? So fortunately, Barbara makes it. There we have it. She's have £31,509 left when she hits 90. So based on these assumptions, she can spend £28,000 a year, assuming 2% growth on her investments.
Okay, so I hope you found them examples useful. As I said at the beginning of the video, really you should think about going to see a professional and getting this done. But I think that's a great way. Just give yourself a bit of comfort to help you start to understand how your pensions work out, what investments are, thinking about the percentage returns you get on your pensions, that kind of thing. If you've got any questions on this, put them down in the comments. And also, I've got that spreadsheet that I was using through a lot of that video available. So if you're a subscriber on the channel, drop me a line. My email is eric@timetoretire.co.uk. Give us the name of your YouTube username, and I'll look you up and I'll email you back with that spreadsheet for you to have a little play with yourself. Okay, I hope you found that useful, and I'll see you on the next one.